If we could stay with this a little bit more, and I'm not sure I fully I have the same view about the hegemony of American imperialism, and I completely understand where you are coming from. But I think I'm coming from a different side, which is where I'm very skeptical about writing off of the dominance, hegemony, despotism of the global north and empires, because empires do get replaced soon after another. And I'm not indicating that there are other empires coming up, which I don't think is the case. When I look at the US, and I'm not talking about how inclusive it is, what is American working class, but the dominance of the United States, I look at the major stock indices. In 1980, at the peak of the Keynesian Great American Golden Capitalism, the US had about 30% of the major stock indices. Today, it's 70%. These are all data taken from the business press, Bloomberg and Financial Times. You look at the big tech. Since 2009, after the stimulus and everything, a lot of money went into them. Yeah. They are not inclusive at all. But their share in the global capital market, the US outweighs others by 4 times. Yep. In the debt and equity, which forms the capital market, which is a $13 to $14 trillion market, 70% of the capital inflows comes into the United States. These are only some of the parameters I laid out about the continued dominance of the United States economy. Over the rest, I'm not thinking about the Europe and others. They are really facing recessions, and they don't dominate. Yeah. Then there's the military component, which, as you admitted, it's absolutely trivial to talk about any other resistance. I mean, yes, Russia has weapons, China has some technology, but the US is by far, there is no one else there. And then we can think about the cultural terms, right? I've been to China, I study China, part of my research. We will discuss some of that, but China's ability to influence the rest of the world on cultural terms is way, way more limited than the United States. Yes. So respond to this. And my final comment would be on the BRICS itself, and we can discuss that separately. I like to see a multipolar world, but the excitement about BRICS, which I am politically, when I look at the reality, sometimes I find a juvenile excitement. And that's because a lot of the BRICS indicator comes from China. Yeah. One of the statistics given out by, let's say, Jeffrey Sachs, someone whom I admire in some ways, not his shock therapy and other things. He says that in the 1990s, height of the unipolar world, or the beginning, the BRICS, the Z7 countries shared about 45% of global GDP. And today that is down to like 29%. Right. And the BRICS nation were about 18, 19%. That's up to like 35%. More, 41. Yeah. But the missing link here is, if you take out China from that equation, the parameters are much more modest. And we can go sector by sector, like manufacturing and so on and so forth. What I am saying is that I, as your student, a student of your economic lectures, I fail to relate to the collapse of American imperialism, even though I desire the end of that empire. So teach me more.
Okay. London remained very important in the global economy, even to this day. Mm-hmm. But the British Empire is a joke. Mm-hmm. There is no British Empire. Every empire leaves a residue. I mean, if you go to Italy, Italy is a small corner of Europe, economically speaking. And yet there are things there, the Vatican, the feudal remnants, the castles, the cuisine, the dress. They have held on, as most empires have, to something. The French have nothing. except the residue of an. I love. My father is French.
I know.
You know, I speak French. I mean, but I can assure you, I love French. I go there every chance I get. But look, you know, it's a game. Mr. Macron is a joke as a leader. Even the French understand that. He has the popularity, I don't know, 12% of the polls. Yeah, and he just got defeated in 2 elections in a row. He can't give up. There's a politics, there's a revelation. You hold on. You're wearing jeans. That's soft power of the United States. The whole world learned that this really nothing but America. It was exported in the second half of the 20th century. Before that, it was a small pants company in California. It will be, my guess is long after the American empire is in memory, jeans will exist. Mm-hmm. They are the residue. The United States has this incredible nuclear arsenal. What good is it? They can't use it. They had an they understood, reasoning like you do, or like you just said you do. They took one look at the Russians when they crossed the border and invaded Ukraine in February of 2022. They looked at the situation and they smiled. Mr. Blinken, Mr. Sullivan, the neocons have been waiting for a chance to get Russia for 30 years. For them, the Cold War never ended. Mm-hmm. For them, because they live in the world of an empire dominating. They never lived in the world of communism, socialism, Marxism, about which they know nothing. That's my generation. Uh-huh. These are I went to the same schools they did. I understand them really well. I have friends like that I know really well. They don't know anything about it. They were proud never to study Marxism, never to read it, never to think about it, not to work. They were leaders of the big power in the world. And they were clear that they could and they would win in the Ukraine. They're defeated. They're completely defeated. They even know it. Yesterday's New York Times has a story about the end. It's over. Even the New York Times, which is desperately their newspaper, not mine. But it's so grotesque. They didn't understand BRICS. They didn't understand what it means that Russia can go and sell oil and gas to India and China. They didn't get it. Why not? That's not a brilliant inference. If you know something about the BRICS, if you know something about the energy needs that China and India have, and that Russia is the great export. I mean, how complicated was this? So these are smart people. I mean, these are intelligent folks. Why'd they miss this? They missed it because they're living in the 20th century. They're living with the dominance that they are committed to preserve. They say that all the time. They are determined to preserve. I don't doubt them. They are.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yep.
But they can't. They can't. And why can't they? Because there are too many contradictions that they can't navigate anymore. They didn't have to in the later 20th century because it was the story you told. We are the center. We are the dominant. Are there ways in which they still are? Yes. An empire doesn't fall apart neatly across the board in all dimensions. It's like when someone says we have a 4% inflation. Yes, but eggs went up by 200% and gasoline only by 3%. It's on and on. An inflation is a general, everything has its own pace. Or if you use Marxism, it's an unevenly developing society. And the empire is as uneven a development as anything else. So I expect to see areas that we haven't even seen yet where the United States may become dominant. One of those that, for example, that many of us missed was fracking. We didn't understand what the fracking phenomena could do to the United States, switching it from net importer to net exporter of oil and gas. So, all right, we have to, that very important to the empire, ability to survive. But you are watching, I mean, I don't want to throw counter-examples at yours. And
no, please throw counter-examples, because that will lead to more.
Then that's all we're doing. You're giving...
Right.
Okay, I'll do that, but I expect that there will be areas where the United States holds on to its empire. You know, maybe what happened in Syria recently is an ability of the United States to have a stronger position in that part of the world than it had before. Maybe the Israeli horror is strengthening something. But I can show you about both of those that there may be ways it's strengthening, but there are ways in which the empire is done. When you have vote after vote in the United Nations of 150 countries against 2, U.S. and Israel, the handwriting is on the wall. You can pretend, and you may be right, it may take 30 years for this to play out. Look, my parents were refugees from Nazism in Europe. That's why I speak French and German. My mother German, my father French. Part of what you're watching in Gaza is the repayment by those people of what they suffered, because it's not them, their parents, their grandparents suffered. You know that from you know people who are Muslim and who are Hindu and who went through the partition and all of that, and it's still in their heads. Mr. Modi's whole political career is wrapped up in that issue from which he will never escape, whatever you think about him. All right, counterexamples. Most of the governments in Europe are what we would nowadays call center-right governments. They supported the United States in their own area, Europe, right? Ukraine is part of Europe, not part of any other place. It's Europe. In Europe, they followed the United States and spent a fortune of money which they cannot afford to throw endless junk into a dead hole of Ukraine, all of which is gone now, okay? Why did they do that? Their people don't support them. The polling in Europe is crystal clear. They do not support it. Now Mr. Trump is threatening, because of the difficulties in this country,
to make them pay.
That's right. They can't pay. Where are they going to get it from? They can't pay. And they are now confronted with the deal they made, which can't be sustained. Now, you could answer me by saying, well, Mr. Trump may let that go, like he lets other things go, like he may have to let go the export or deporting of the immigrants. Yeah, he may. I mean, who can account for what that guy does? On the other hand, the basic problem doesn't go away. Europe made a deal, like in the story of Faust, Mephistopheles, and here's the deal. You protect us, you Americans, military, against, let's call it Russia and communism, but it's against our own working class. And here's how that's going to work. We don't have any defense expenditures, and not very much. You're going to take care of that. You want to, because you're going to do a Keynesian game. That's what you're good at. And you're going to do it through the military. You're going to pump your economy. By the way, those have been going on and off for, I don't know, a matter. So here's the deal. We will have enough money that we can subsidize our capitalists to compete with you, and we can give social welfare in a way that nobody else in the world can do. We will give our workers medical care, free education, my family, my French family, 5 weeks off paid vacation every year. All my family gets that. That's when I visit them. That's how I can go. And we will have enough money to do that. And we'll keep our economies going. We know we can't do like you, but you're going to help us subsidize our own capitalism. Okay, that's how it worked. The United States got the ability to spend amounts of money on the military that are silly, and to do it year in and year out, and to even sell to the American people that by doing this, we make sure to have war over there, not here. So it's good for us. We are saving ourselves. Unbelievable. But when the wind is blowing in your direction, you can avoid your contradictions. You can paper them over. You can make solutions because you don't deal with them. But that means you haven't dealt with them. And one day, and we're at that day now, it won't be possible anymore. And now the Europeans are in an impossible situation. They can't develop their own military. That's why they're not doing it. Where's the money going to come from? They can't. If they try to do away with their social welfare, they will. Look at France. Mm-hmm. The largest bloc in the French parliament now is Monsieur Mélenchon. I don't know if you follow French politics. He's a Marxist and has been all his life. How is this possible? How did they, the French, who can't unify about anything, I'm half French, they all got together, the socialists, the communists, the Greens, and Monsieur Mélenchon, and together they're the majority. They're the largest plurality, but on their way to a majority. This is as nothing as what you're going to see in the rest of Europe. I mean, they may come up with a temporary solution, but what you're watching is it's unraveling on them. And you can tell me, well, but they could do this, or well, yeah. Look, the war in Ukraine helped the right wing tell the story. We have to protect against the Russians. And to develop a dominance in Finland and in Sweden. Okay, I get it. Is that a strengthening of NATO? Yes. Is NATO stronger? No. Stop. The whole point of NATO, the United States keeps telling the Europeans, we're moving to China. Our focus is China. China. What does that tell the Europeans? If our focus is China, and you're in a deep trouble in your country, we're not going to help you. We don't care about you. We don't even care if half of you go over and join the BRICS. Mr. Macron is rumored to have requested BRICS membership for France and to have been turned down for it. I mean, these are signs. I don't know if that rumor is true, but these are signs that I would argue are crystal clear. 2 days ago, I believe, was the first shipment, may have been a week ago, of a brand new port built on the Pacific side of the Pacific Ocean in Peru. Mm-hmm. It's the biggest, most modern seaport, I believe, in Latin America, possibly in the whole Western Hemisphere. I don't know. Built with Chinese money and engineers, but it's a deal between China and Peru. And what does it permit? The whole southern half of Latin America, that is Peru, Chile, Argentina, all huge economies, those three, particularly Chile and Argentina above all. They don't need the United States. They don't need the Panama Canal. They now have a magnificent artery, goes directly from Peru, will be their export hub, to China, which will be buying everything and shipping everything back with an enormous subsidy because it's a much shorter ride. No fees in the canal, nothing. And this is happening every day. These are not good things for the United States. Will the United States still be writing the insurance for the voyage of the grain from Argentina to China? Yes.
The insurance companies would profit.
Will be an American company. That's right. But over time, because if the British are any model, over time, a Chinese bank will come in and rescue one of those insurance companies or buy it out or start with a small interest. Let me give you another example. The United States slaps 100% tariff. Mr. Biden did this. 100% tariff on electric vehicles from China. In France, if you go to France today and you go on the highway, you will see BYD, the Chinese company, its automobiles, electric car all over the road. Trucks, cars, buses, everything. You go to the United States, not one. No, go look, you won't see a thing. Okay, we have 100% tariff. Okay, now let's follow the logic. I'm going to be an economist for a moment. Here's the logic. Every American company that needs to buy cars or trucks as inputs to its business would like to buy an electric car and an electric truck for 25 reasons. It can't buy the BYD. Why? Because the BYD costs the price of the car plus 100%, doubling the price of the car, of the tariff that goes to Uncle Sam. So if, let's say, simply, the car or the truck costs $30,000 freight on board, $30,000 at the port of entry anywhere else. Here in the United States, you would have to pay $60,000. You'd have to give $30,000 to get it to be shipped, and another $30,000 at the port to Uncle Sam to have it released so you can get it. So no American company is buying BYD electric cars and trucks. What about the quality of electric cars and trucks, BYD? Universally agreed, by far the best quality and the lowest price. In other words, if you look at the last 10 or 15 years of competition to produce electric cars, it's clear who won and who lost that competition for whatever reasons. The Chinese won. They wanted to, and they did, and so they're in. And they're selling those cars all over the world in huge numbers: Asia, Africa, Latin America, Europe. Europe has a tariff, by the way, but they can't afford to do what the Americans do, so their tariff is about 30-40%, not 100%, and that's enough of a difference that the Chinese can make a money. Okay, now let's follow the logic. Every competitor of the United States producing anything, anywhere in the world, is going to now have an advantage that the American doesn't have. He can get cheaper, better vehicles than the American. Why? Because the American, when he buys an electric vehicle, will have to buy a Tesla or a Ford or a General Motors, paying almost what it would cost to get the BYD. They can charge $55,000 because still $5,000 less than the BYD. So they're going to get an inferior product, right? And pay way much more for it. You can't do this. You can do it once. You can do it with one dimension of your product, but you can't. And this is being replicated over. And if there are more tariffs, it'll be even worse than it already is. And the electric car is not a minor matter in world trade. Look at what cars have been in the history of Japan or the United States. I mean, they're crucial to the modern device. So they're going to be crucial in the future. So these are signs. They're not finished yet. We're only at the early stages. There will be American efforts to copy. They're already going on. BYD, both its methods and its technology and all the rest. But it's happening too often, and there's very little the other way.
I think
by the way, a footnote, the money coming into New York, that's their money. I mean, it's still the place to play. It's the center of the global capital market, no question. Probably will be for a while. But the rationalizations, the strategic interventions are coming from around the rest of the world, more and more.
But that's where the domination of global capitalism lies. I mean, if our analysis is that global capitalism's dominance lies in manufacturing, then we will reach to that line of argument following total devastation of the U.S. manufacturing, except perhaps the defense industry, to following a logical conclusion, we would say, look, here is the massive decline of the U.S. hegemony. But if our analysis moves on from the manufacturing giants, the monopolies as they created at the time when Paul Baran or Sweezy were writing about monopoly capital. And I think that's sort of my criticism about those who rely too much on Baran and Sweezy's analysis. I don't fault them because they were writing in the 1960s.
Right.
They didn't see the rise of the tech finance sector, which now dominates it. So it's the dominance of the BlackRocks, the asset manager, the Citadel LLCs, the Royal Asset Management in the UK. One can go on and on. That's where the money is coming to. If you look at, a lot of people talk about the military dominance of the US, with the top US expenditure outstripping the next 10. I looked up the Fortune's 500 companies, and you would be surprised, and you would not be because you know this, but a lot of people would be surprised that the dominance in the financial sector is even more than the dominance in the military sector. If you list them, there are some Chinese banks, the agriculture banks, the construction banks, but those are also public sector banks, which doesn't operate with the aim of dominating the world as such. There was a recent conference in Singapore of investors, and there was this question, a show of hands about, is there, and this was one of the massive investment gathering of investors. And the question was, is there anyone who doesn't have one financial asset on dollar terms in the Wall Street in New York? And there was none, which means that dollar continues, and we can discuss a little bit about the de-dollarization and falling apart of the dollar. Dollar continues to be the last haven of investor sentiment.
Absolutely.
So if there is any form of uncertainty, it's not just the raising of interest rates in the United States that pulls back money from the global south. But if there is any uncertainty in the global south where rate of return might be higher in usual terms, they would just switch back because they think that the private property in this place would be protected like nowhere else. So it's the safest haven. We talk about these banks and black money when we talk about safe havens, but in my assessment, the safest haven for private capital and capitalism is the United States capital markets. And as long as that sentiment continues, money keeps flowing here. And you can dominate the electric vehicle market, you can dominate agricultural production sometimes, and you can dominate these lower layers of capitalism, but they don't care. And that's what separates, in my assessment, Britain in 1914 and 1915, where it had already lost out to Germany and the United States in the industrial domain, but it was also slowly losing out in the financial domain. And the United States, which in my assessment has long lost the industrial game to other rivals, the East Asian rivals, the Nick economies, even France and Germans and then Chinese.
Right.
But in my assessment has not lost the financial battle. And that's where I think anyone who quickly writes off the American imperialism, and it must be clear to you, I'm coming from a very different prism. I'm not among those who thinks that American empire is good. It has to go. And it will go in the long run. Our discussion, I think our debate is about the short run. And sometimes my criticism of you, if I may, is that you give the impression that American empire is just collapsing. It's just going away. But someone from the global south, it's difficult for me to see that going away this soon.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say it, and you may be quite right as I think about it. I've lived here all my life. I was born in the United States. I've worked here all my life. I've been taught the lesson over and over again how dominant the United States is. Mm-hmm. And the last 10 years, I did not imagine that I would live to see. So I am partly affected, no doubt, by observing decline, breakdown, difficulty that I never saw admitted. I still see much that is going on that is not admitted. And I'm still rethinking a little bit with chagrin that I didn't see these things before. But that's how this kind of process works. You didn't see it before. It takes the next step, then you revalue your past in the light of the changes of the present. So you and I may not, I don't know, we'll see how far apart we are. I have no dispute about the dominance of finance, but I would also argue that I have now been called in quite a few times to hedge funds based here in New York who tell me straightforward, we have lots of people we count on to advise us, but we don't normally talk to people like you. And we realize we should. We need to factor into our strategic planning what the perspective you bring. Mm-hmm. So they're not doing me any favor. They realize that the empire, translation, the empire is perhaps not what we assumed it would be. And those are the questions they ask. When I finish my little spiel, which they asked me to do, then the questions are all about that. And I would...
It might be also...
Let me finish. I would argue, you might talk to the head of BlackRock or Blackstone or any of them, and you might be surprised at the disconnect in their minds between their being an American, because that's what they are, mm-hmm. and the logic of their investment portfolio, which is now explicitly taking into account, in many cases, the decline of the American empire, which they talk about. Publicly, no, that's unwise to do. But do they? Yeah. Oh, yeah. How many, what proportion? There's no way for me to know that. But are they there at the very top of the pile of those people? They have to be. They're crystal clear that the war in Ukraine was lost. They knew that a year ago. A year ago. Only in this country are there still significant numbers of people who haven't figured that out yet. And those have to be now managed because they're a liability politically. I think you have to be very careful, though. It's not just that, manufacturing has gone, but with it have gone all kinds of assumptions, all kinds of notions, for example, of what it means to really have a developed infrastructure. What does it mean to have a telephone system, a train system? Right. You need all of that. And how are you going to do that? And where do you even locate the friggin' harbor or the rail line? These have become strategic questions that have to be analyzed. You have to have a 30, 40-year horizon. You don't want to put the railroad when it goes to a place from which the ships will not be going. Well, you've wasted your whole thing, I wrote a doctoral dissertation about Kenya in East Africa. And I remember studying why the British built the one line of railway from the port, Mombasa, in the port, into the interior. Well, it's because they export the coffee. That's what the Kikuyu, if you know Kenya a little bit, the Kikuyu highlands is where they made the reservations. They forced the Africans, made them effectively slaves, brought the British colonial in to set up the coffee plantations. But you would never build a railroad like that again. Why? Because they built for the empire because Britain wanted coffee. Britain wanted to play the role in the world of coffee that they already had with tea. So, okay, that's what Kenya became, just like Uganda becomes cotton.
Right.
And stuff like that. This is what they did. And that's happening now. Blackstone is facilitating the development of infrastructure in Kenya and Tanzania, whose intention is to be providers to China. And the Chinese are building the railroads that the Blackstone is financing. What Blackstone is doing, which I believe they know, is they're going where the profitable, their job is to make money over the 5 or 10 year horizon. That's what they're doing. And if that means building the mechanisms that in the long run will come back and bite them, they give you the same answer that Keynes gave. In the long run, we are all dead. So we cannot gamble on that. But you're gambling with what you're doing. Then they look at you. They have no answer for that. Because they've accomplished what you and I are arguing about. They know. I hope I'm not giving them more than they deserve. I really wouldn't want to do that. But they may understand the situation they're in and not want to face it. You can say, because of where you're coming from, oh, in the long run, it's all that. They can't do that. They can't do that. They have to devalue the long run if it looks like that. So it becomes irrelevant. It's dead. It's dead. And so they're going to make, and the possibility that what they're doing is financing their own demise, this is not, they won't go there.
Yeah.
Even after, and I mean this, even after 3 martinis in the same meal, they won't go there.
I wanted to ask you, as you spoke about the nervousness within the business class,
yes.
And I wanted to follow up a question since it's so real. You get that impression when every time you read the Bloombergs and the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal. But also when you read Marx's understanding of the horizontal instability because of competition within the business class. So
right.
He spoke of at least 2 contradictions. One was the vertical between the working class and the owners of capital, and there was a horizontal competition between the business class because they wanted to outcompete each other in terms of prices, in terms of inventing new technology. I'm repeating things that you are the master in for our audience, and that Marx called the relative surplus. I wonder if some of those nervousness, which you spoke of and which I see all the time, is not necessarily because they feel that a grand apparatus is collapsing, rather because they are competing within their own rivals and they have to sustain within that unstable market. And why I'm asking this is because, again, coming from that idea of monopoly capital where things are relatively more stable, there are no rivals, and that leads to stagnancy and fall in aggregate demand and all that theory. I think that's a wrong line of saying, because when I read the business press, I see a lot of instability. Citadel LLC is thinking about retaining its monopoly data that it created after the stimulus of following the global financial crisis, where it picked up easy money and invested them to gather data, and now they have become the masters of quoting fair prices to brokers in the capital market, and that gives them their small little empire, and they want to protect their empire, not necessarily the empire that we were talking about. So what I'm saying essentially is, yes, there are lots of nervousness and there's a lot of competition, and there are different segments within the business, and within the business class, it's not a uniform class, it's not a unified class. Right. The creditors and the debtors sometimes talk in very different language in terms of where the interest rate should be. Right. So my question to you is some of that nervousness is it inbuilt within capitalism? And why that is important, I feel, is to not underestimate the strength of capitalism, which many Marxists, including, I feel, to some extent, Marx as well, did. I don't fault Marx as much because when he was writing, capitalism was not as strong as when, let's say, Gramsci was writing or when what we are seeing. But a lot of Marxists of the classical variety would also write of capitalism very quickly, rather quickly. My final comment for you to respond to everything is that I must also admit I was born after the 1990s, so I was part of a relatively pessimistic world in terms of the left, where we are much more defensive and we don't see revolutions in the air, and so maybe it's my inability to see about or envisage a post-capitalist world. But my basic point here is that all this nervousness within the business class, the instability, one galloping another, business class going bankrupt all the time, the quibbles about the interest rates, these are inbuilt mechanisms of capital, and then they don't imply at all the overall collapse of the capitalist empire.
Okay. Well, you're quite right. It is my engagement with the Marxist tradition, which has been very important in my education, despite my participation in the elite universities of this country, where the effort was made to remove all of that kind of thinking. But fortunately, it was made by people who didn't understand it in the first place. So their skill at making you not believe it was poor because they didn't know what they were doing. That's the Cold War. And the consequences of that for the United States run very deep, but that's another conversation. If you engage the Marxist tradition the way I did, particularly focusing on Das Kapital and the economic analytics, then you would always expect to find within the capitalist class enormous uncertainty, competition, anxiety of one kind or another. And it would take a variety of forms. It would sometimes be focused on the competition horizontal among producers of the same or more or less the same commodity. The fear of what you rightly referred to, but I won't go into because it'll take a while, a relative surplus value, the ability of a competitor to be able to sell the same product at a lower value than you can do, and thereby steal your customers and you are finished. It's that kind of worry. And that means worried about new technology, worried about installing it, worried about where you even find out about it. All of those things are very real, and they impose themselves on every capital. He has to. If he's not nervous and he's not understanding, and that means he won't be there very long, because it's also a training capitalism for the capitalists how to function. Then there's a whole nother kind of anxiety, which is also present, which is the tense relationship between you and the employees that you hire, whose attitudes, whose work ethics, whose productivity, however you measure it, are a constant source of anxiety because they become a competitive value relative to others who might be having a different experience. So you're constantly looking for how to deal with all of the real, and they're not just real now, but they're potential real issues. You know, we've been talking earlier about immigration. Immigration's always can I take advantage of an immigrant? And the reason migration happens, if you ever studied it, is not just the push that makes a person leave where they come from, but the pull of where they're going to. And there better be a pull, and if there isn't what is that pull? And the pull has always been, in large measure, that you can rip off the immigrant in a way you cannot the domestic
citizens.
Now, it's not always true, but it's a good rule, and certainly been the case here in the United States. So I expect the capitalists to be full of anxiety about a whole host of these kinds of problems. I think in the United States, the difference is that on top of those, which capitalists have learned to try to navigate, even, for example, and this is where I had an early disagreement with Sweezy and Magdorf and Baran, who were my teachers. I don't find in Marxian argument, in Marxian theory, a tendency from competitive to monopoly.
Right.
Or let me put it differently. I see that, but I see the reverse as well.
Exactly.
So for me, I'm expecting at any moment to be able to identify, or I should be able to identify, movement that would be described as competition evolving into monopoly, and simultaneously elsewhere the reverse.
So part of the Schumpeterian argument of regeneration through destruction of even unproductive units.
Yes, similar to that. Right. That's right. But the movement is in both directions.
Right, absolutely.
And I would expect to find massive efforts by those who have achieved the monopoly to hold on to it. I would expect to find similar strategies that got them to a monopoly and similar vulnerability for the monopoly to be undone. And that they learn that a monopoly that isn't actively protected is doomed. And therefore the anxiety of the monopolist is different, but is not greater or lesser than the anxiety of the competitor. Okay, so I approach it with that. But when I talk about the decline of the empire, I'm talking about positions achieved in the 20th century that are leaving the scene in the 21st. They are the kind of anxiety that you might, I'll pick an example. When transportation in the United States, at the end of the 18th century and in the early part of most of the 19th century, when transportation was with a horse and a carriage, there was lots of competition among the people who made the carriages, made the wheels, built the roads, there had lots of that. And the railroads came in at a certain point. But the automobile, there was a qualitative change.
Right.
You might even play with the old Marxian quantity quality, that there's a quantitative struggle. Can I lower the unit value of output and defeat my competitor that way? But if you keep doing that, it's like lowering the temperature of the water. At a certain point, it becomes a solid, it's no longer a liquid.
Right.
At a certain point, you don't have an anxiety of competition. You have an anxiety that your business is historically finished. Will there be some people who produce horse carriages? Absolutely. Did some of them survive? Yes, they did. But that industry was finished. And most of the people involved in it eventually, like in the textbook, found new jobs in the automobile. Usually one that could take a skill that had been relative and adapt it to which becomes kind of the pattern. And so my argument about the anxiety of the business community now is an anxiety that is caused by the declining empire and heavily influenced, not only. Capitalists are constantly navigating, if I can use the language, between those things they have to be anxious about that are the old competitive and those things that are new. And they're often skeptical, not like you are. How big a difference is this? Well, often it isn't. It's a mirage, you can survive. But another times you can't. You're seeing that, interestingly, in our culture now, in a number of places. There are, retail stores that used to be very successful businesses loads of them.
Right.
They're finished. They're dead. They're gone.
More so in the United States. That's something, it always strikes me when I come to the US as opposed to, of course, where I come from in India. But even comparing with places like London, whose streets are always much more full of small little retail stores, as opposed to New York is perhaps slightly different, but you go to a place like Chicago, it's so corporatized, it's full of those supermarkets and shopping malls.
And the whole country is.
Right.
For example, we have a vast wasteland of malls, these special places that were built so that the businesses could cluster. They're dead. They're
Today there is a Bloomberg article desperately trying to say, look, the commercial real estate sector has been written off for a while, but look how they're reviving and how Amazons and others now have realized that we need a brick and mortar warehouses, and so they are coming back, and houses have not been built as much, so prices are going up, and so on and so forth. But anyway, sorry for that.
No. I would describe that differently, but well, maybe it's worth it. Amazon, UPS, the whole apparatus of you're not going to the store, you're not going to the thing, because you can so very conveniently order it
online.
So you go online and you pick your jacket and it comes in a package. And so we have developed, because of the craziness of capitalism, we have wasted a vast industry, retail. And remember, retail, particularly big retail, is based on credit, which means that an enormous amount of bank credit is in the hands that can never be paid back. Those people they will never pay it back. Because of the leases being often 10 years, it'll take time before the bank has to declare that we are bankrupt. So you can delay the bank crisis, but if you study the banking system in the United States, it's very worried, above all, about commercial real estate right now, because they know there's a tsunami coming, and how it comes and when it comes. Okay, but this is
also they're very nervous about the necessity to raise interest rates, because a lot of their assets is through lending to these sectors. When you raise the interest rates, those businesses go bankrupt, and so your bank goes essentially bankrupt. But you also have to control inflation, because that's the mandate, or also to disempower the laboring class.
You're making my argument. You have an accumulation of country. I'm not looking. I don't expect the empire to fall. Poosh, donk. Even if you take an example like that, the 1989 Russia, that's an accumulation. Russia didn't have something bizarre happen in the late 1980s. But if you put together the arms race they couldn't afford, and taking over in Afghanistan, which they couldn't afford, and it was too much. They couldn't. They had promised their own working class a rising standard of living. They had delivered it to them for the period 1970 to 1985. That's 15 years. It's a whole new generation who had the right nice clothing and nice stores in Moscow and Leningrad and blah, blah, blah. You couldn't do it. It's what's happening in Europe. They can't sustain their social welfare system, and they can't take it away. And they don't know what to do. And the United States, far from helping them, is saying, fuck you, you're on your own.
Spend more on military now.
Yes, spend on the one thing for sure they can't do. I mean, anyway. So I want to go back to the United States. Why did I pick the mall? Because here's the way I see the story. You destroy the physical mall because you can do something that the merchant did for the manufacturer better than the merchant can. think of I don't know if you've ever studied Volume 3 of Capital, but Marx does this there for us. So one of the great benefits of my colleagues in the United States is having never opened that book and read it, they have no idea how to think like this. Anyway, Marx, very clever there. So the capitalist produces a product, this water, this cup, right? And now when the production is done, the capitalist has to convert it back into money. And that costs, the capitalist could hire a salesman or a saleswoman and get them a computer to keep track and put them in a car, and they can travel to all the different places which sell it. And that costs them money.
Right.
That's a deduction of the surplus used to accomplish something that is not productive, namely the conversion of one form of value, the cup, into another, the money. Okay. Along comes the merchant, the retailer, and
we will
says,
facilitate this and lower the cost of this conversion.
That's right. You give me a discount of 2 cents per cup, I'll take care of it. I will have a truck pick up the cup from the back of your factory. You don't have to worry about it. I'll take it from there. It'll deliver to my store. I am building the store. People will come to the store and they will buy, among other things, your cup. And I will sell it at its value, $10. You will have given me 2 cents, $9.98. That's all I need. You were spending, let me show you, you were spending 18 cents on sales. Now you're going to be spending 2. Okay, now comes along Amazon. Goes to the manufacturer. You don't have to spend 2. Just give me 1. Undercuts the merchant.
Right.
Destroys them all.
And then raises.
And then raises the price. And when he does that, because he's got a monopoly on this game, he can squeeze both ends. That's the genius of it. He squeezes the manufacturer, but even if he can find another, even if he can't squeeze the manufacturer, he's busy looking for an alternative and then plays them against each other and gets the cheaper one, the one to give him the bigger. But the margins are becoming thinner and thinner. So what happens? In order to survive, Amazon has to what? Squeeze the shit out of its workers. Operate these, I don't know if you've ever been in one, I have, an Amazon distribution center, which is an enormous building with these trucks and the workers who are monitored. There are pill dispensers.
Right.
Have you ever been in there?
I've been in Indian Amazon.
Well, I'm sure you have the same. That's
same.
Stupid of me. I should have understood.
Right.
No, you're right. Of course you do.
It's even worse there in terms of labor
but the
conditions.
pill, free. You can get aspirin. You can get, because they know they're driving you to be sick.
Right.
And now they're giving you a quick, for free. For free. The workers told me with great excitement, for free. So guess what? It is becoming intolerable, not just for the workers, but
for the small businesses.
No, if I get that, for the customers of Amazon itself, because there's too much publicity about the horrible. My wife will not order from Amazon.
Yeah, that's also happening in Europe and the
Yes.
US, but not in the global south. The global south, the consumers are mostly middle class and they are obnoxiously disconnected from the working class, as the global south is even more unequal than the global north. And so Amazon has destroyed small businesses mainly.
Yeah, that's what it did here.
It's horrible for the working class, but given so much of it is informal working class anyway, they do there. Sometimes they die, riding motorbikes because they have to deliver in time. Meanwhile, the consumer class is very happy because they have been getting better price points. In the global north, I see these anti-Amazon boycott movements. Yeah, more and more.
And you also have, more indirectly, but for me, I'm a Marxist, right? You have the working class. We have an upsurge in the labor movement in this country.
Absolutely.
And it's centered in places like Amazon, Starbucks, all of that. And so this is another problem And it's causing great anxiety because there's a demand for higher wages everywhere.
Right.
Boeing, those workers rejected the contract twice. It's a whole new attitude. I'm called by unions. I haven't been for a long time. They want me to explain to you. Oh boy, will I explain. But here's another one that's very important. Amazon can't deliver. It can't deliver partly because the workers are angry. And the workers, throw the package out the window. I mean, they're sabotage all the time. And the more they come down on their workers, refuse to recognize the union, the more. And guess what? That's the movement back. Macy's is trying to tell investors, the Macy's stock is in the floor. Kohl's, another one, in the floor. I mean, at 10-year lows in the stock market. Why? Their response. They're coming back. Well, the evidence for that is small, but a little. They're coming back. They don't want to say why. They're not coming back because you're good. They're coming back because they're horrified at what's happening over there. Too many stories. And it's not just the stories in the media. It's the story of your neighbor. It's the story of the nephew of your cousin who took 2 weeks in the hospital because he was so exhausted by what his job was over the Christmas season, helping to move shit. I mean, wow. Right. The Canadian postal system is on strike, has been now for many weeks. That's part of that. They were pushing it, and so the whole Christmas season blew away. You can't mail anything.
Yes.
I gave a talk to the Canadian Auto Workers Union, right? 6 weeks ago. I still haven't got paid. I got a salary for, a payment for it because it can't get through the mail. I can't get paid from this. The union has paid me. It's not an issue, but I can't receive it because there's so these are new levels of anxiety. These are whole industrial anxiety. And then there is an anxiety about China. There are enough capitalists in the United States who have been threatened by or destroyed by the competition from China. You should see China as serious in that regard.
I think that's my next question, and that's why I'm stopping you. But before that, as you were speaking, I was also I'm not sure if you are following this California bill about the minimum wage, which was raised from $16 per hour to $20 for hotel workers in the restaurant sector, which employs more than 60 employees. And Bloomberg covers it and says, their usual rant, why just those who work in the restaurant sector? Why not this sector? And so this is a bad idea. Let's do this and that. Yes, but I think a good segue into this is to discuss a little bit on China, also to connect with your discussion on empire. I'm
a little lost, though. What's the link to the restaurant worker minimum wage?
No, but since you were talking about the center of discontentment and labor organization within this kind of gig works, which has been going on.
I just wanted to begin to elaborate the levels of anxiety. You know, your labor force, your competitor, and now China, now larger social forces that you're upset about. But there are some intangibles that should be in this conversation. The level of social division and hostility inside the United States, I've never seen in my lifetime. And, you know, on my gray hair, I've been here a long time. Lived all my life in this country. This I have never seen before, not this level. And you're seeing the return of serious pathologies, white supremacy. We thought as a nation that had been settled. That probably was naive, probably was driven by wishful thinking.
You were also the product of the post-civil rights movement, the excitement of the civil rights movement.
Yeah, among other things.
anti-Vietnam War.
Yeah, and then it became, you couldn't say bad words, you couldn't be racist in public. It was considered, it reflected on you rather than whoever you were calling the name, I don't know what the condition in India is with the Dalit people, but what that was, I haven't heard enough stories to know that. Has that changed? Well, we thought it had changed in this country, and we are confronted.
The Dalits in India most often cites the example of the civil rights movement as one of the positive things that happened, which never happened to the Dalits in India.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and that's how we saw it too.
Right.
That's right. We thought we had really overcome that. We didn't. White supremacy is much stronger than most of us, I admit, me too, had understood. I will tell you that as a child in this country, growing up, remember my parents are European, white Europeans. So I didn't grow up except in that framework. I didn't speak English until I was 5 years old. I understood as a child. Once I could see in my community how white people lived and how black people lived, I understood the way you do without knowing you're understanding that this was horrible, that the treatment of these people, just beyond words. And it stayed with me all the way through. There were very, very, very few black students at Harvard, very few at Stanford, and very few at Yale. And that no one said a word about it. No one noticed it. No one took account of it. I mean, a handful of the black kids were beginning to say something. But otherwise, it was routine. It was normal. Anyway, that has resurfaced. So have other pathologies. I mean, the number of people, we had a scare here. I mean this. Last week, suddenly there were drones, this new toy that the military have. There were some drones around the airports here in New York and New Jersey, particularly in New Jersey. The whole country began a speculation on the sort of, we all laugh, but it's a sign. And we have it all the time now. UFOs, flying saucer. Well, I mean, people are in trouble. Even the very hatred of the immigrant. It's preposterous. What? This desperate Mexican family with their little children, and they have nothing. They literally have the shirt on their body, are demonized. The president, an invasion. What? And then they're caught putting the children in cages because they have no place for them. I mean, and they're about to do it again. Let me give you another example. The normalization of what the Israelis are doing in Gaza. Right? This is not about the Israeli versus Palestinian struggle. I have my views, and if you're interested, I'd be glad to share. I'm talking about after last October, after the Hamas attack, what did the Israelis do in response? And I believe that deserves the name genocide. It's an unspeakable attack on a civilian population, violating every norm of war, Geneva Convention, any of the others. You're targeting hospitals and schools and churches. The excuse, there were Hamas activists in it, that the Geneva Convention doesn't have an exemption for that. Mm-hmm. You can't do that. You can't kill large numbers of people. For me, that's a sign. It's a sign, A, of something terribly wrong inside Israel, but that's over there. I'm talking about the American response, in which, thankfully, a large an amazingly large number of Americans see it for what it is and are opposed to it. It's amazing. And I don't want to in any way take away from that. That's heroic.
Right.
But I'm more interested for the moment, analytically, in the decision by the Democrats and the Republicans and the leaders of most colleges and universities in the country to feel entitled to repress college students who are doing no violence, no nothing, who are standing in a little tent on the grass in the center of the university, holding signs or singing songs. I mean, it's unspeakable what is done. They would never do that if there were a civil rights march saying you must give equal housing or equal credit to black people or something. But they needed to endorse a genocide. Whoa. This is a qualitatively different thing. It doesn't take a genius to know anything that is done to others will eventually come home and be done by you to yourself, to your own people. The university is showing itself prepared to do that to its students because it's prepared to do that, what is being done in Gaza also. So I think there's a level of disintegration in this society, which is what I would expect from a declining empire, because you have to be alive to the complicated ways in which an empire unevenly. So I would push at you. You can find areas that are not declining. Bank deposits can be going really good over here, or investment in the stock. Yes. And you have every right to bring them up and ask, how do you account for that? Of course. But I would argue that had you understood what I'm saying, you wouldn't be surprised to discover how uneven the decline is. What's going on here? Well, I'm amazed at the support for Palestine in the United States. I mean, what's going on? Right. Somewhere, the declining empire is visible to my I'm still a professor. I teach. I'm about, next semester I'm teaching again at something called the New School. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
New School of Social...
Yeah. So I'm a visiting...
One of those leftist...
it was.
Lefty type...
not anymore.
Really? Okay.
Not anymore. They came down on their Palestinian students and faculty also. That's another thing. You're watching protections of people being ignored. Professors are discovering that tenure isn't what they thought it was. That's another sign. These institutional arrangements. Trump is a sign. Trump is a transgressor of boundary, of what is polite to say. He says what is impolite. He does it deliberately. He does it because it's his reputation by now. I get that. But it is acceptable. He gets convicted for raping a woman. And he's still the president. You have to come to terms with that. He has put it now into his cabinet people committed to destroy the cabinet position that they have been put to, the new head of the Department of Education is instructed by Trump to end the Department of Education.
Right. There is also Vivek Ramaswamy and others are appointed to dismantle to fire people and even dismantle whatever productive is left within the state.
Right.
As you were talking about the student protests and how that have informed both American audience and also to some extent, the rest of the global South, although the rest of the global South didn't need that to be informed about the genocide. As an observer of American politics and history, I thought like this was one of those rare moments within American history where its democracy actually deepened. Not the superficial democracy that we talk about all the time, but if one thinks about the New Deal years, how the laboring class was absorbed within the democratic framework and how people were actually enfranchised, then the civil rights movement, to some extent, the anti-Vietnam protests, and then there was a long kind of decline or silence in terms of the dismantling of the labor union movement. Even the universities have been very, very quiet in the last 30, 40 years. And this was, I felt like one of those moments where a lot of students and them being part of the gig working workforce, a lot of them would work part-time in cafe and so they understand, and all of them came together with the Amazon strikes and the Starbucks and all of that. But to stay for one more moment and ask a question, I think I completely understand and agree that one cannot look for a total collapse of empire at every node. And this is like for those of our viewers who might follow like Marxian dialogues may think about this Althusserian point of condensation, whether these are like different crises but happening at different levels of time, or whether we are at a time when all of them have collapsed at a time when we can think about something of a reconstruct. I don't know whether that's barbarism or socialism, but I'm even not sure whether it's a point of condensation. So to be concrete, like one can think about the collapse of the empire of cotton, like Sven Becker's book, like not to say that cotton has disappeared, but the cotton barons and how that used to influence politics and all of that, that was gone, and that was probably replaced by other empires, empires of automobiles, empires of others. So I understand your very not sophisticated, very incisive, insightful argument that empires are collapsing and maybe like new empires are coming together. But these are also these are small little empires that we are discussing. And there are these grand empires, the empires of the IMFs and the World Banks, how austerity is blackmailed, how doles of money is offered to all those hundreds of countries facing sovereign debt crisis to say that if you don't cut down on your pension schemes or wages, we're not going to give you this important money. If not, you have to default and you are gone. And so that's one kind of empire, the hegemony of the dollar imposing sanctions. So that's the grand empire. So I understand your point that the small little empires, which are not insignificant, I'm not trying to diminish their importance by saying small little, but these are empires within a grand empire. So are you saying, if you're saying that these small little empires are collapsing and maybe new empires are bubbling up, that makes sense to me. But if you're also saying that the grand edifice, the grand empire where the center is the United States, the dollar empire, the IMF World Bank empire, if all of that is also collapsing, do you think that is also weakening the military empire? Whether you think that is also collapsing? And if that is collapsing, I think that's a good segue to also invite you to discuss what you have been wanting to do for a while. A lot of people are talking about China now. Even people interested in empires, theoreticians, intellectuals are talking about a future Chinese empire. So answer me about my first question and then take it down towards your understanding of where you see China going forward.
I like your invocation of Althusser. He's one of my teachers, so I like that. I think we're headed towards one of those condensation moments. I don't think we're there yet, but I think that the number and variety and levels of crisis are more intense than I anticipated. certainly more intense than I saw up until the crash. People have asked me this, so I give this answer. The crash of 2008 and 9, global, was an enormous change. And for me, I would date the quantum leap, the break from the little crises one can say are normal in capitalism, within an industry, within an enterprise, within a sector, even within a whole country, now become qualitatively and quantitatively bigger. They are moving toward a possible condensation when a big break happens. I want to remind everyone, because I like telling the story, of a famous conversation brought to the attention of Lenin in Russia, supposedly by Trotsky and Stalin, who brought it to him. And they were moaning and groaning at some meeting, the revolution is taking so long. And his answer to them was, sometimes for decades, nothing happens. And then in a few weeks, decades happen. Okay. So we're not there yet, but on levels I had not foreseen, we see it moving in that direction now. And I could actually see it surprising us almost at any juncture now because of what has happened in the last 15 years, more or less. The special thing that I want to make sure to say, the reason you had that special moment of the mass American young people, and older ones too, but particularly young people, finding Israel's behavior in Gaza outrageous, or whatever word you want for it. There is an economic basis. I'm not taking away from the ideological dimensions of this. My students cannot get the jobs that my generation of professors assumed. I assumed if I stayed long enough and got my PhD, that I might not get a job in the city I wanted or the university I wanted, but I would get a job being a professor if I wished. My students have no such assumption. They expect to put a livelihood together in which they get some income from this activity Mondays and Thursdays, and from this over there, they do that on Tuesdays, and on the weekends they do and they do gig work or part-time, unbelievable. And they don't expect that for a couple of years before no. That's a vista that can last a whole lifetime, or part of it. But there is an disrooted, unrooted bitterness about all of this. Because as young people, they were led to expect what I was led to expect. But unlike me, they didn't get it. And they're all very aware that I teach 2 courses a semester and get paid 20 times what they get for doing the same thing. Mm-hmm. It's grotesque. Not only that, since I'm older, they're younger, they probably give more energy to their teaching than I do, having done it for, the outrage of it is, now, people may not say a thing about it, but I'm married to a psychotherapist, and I'm very aware of how that stuff can go in and sit there and come out like a medical doctor will tell you, if it hurts over here, the problem may be here. And part of the job of diagnosis is to show you that where it is not what it is, etc. So I think you're seeing a transformation of the job, a secure job with enough money. That's why we have no marriages. Nobody gets married anymore. What's the point? You can't live off each other. Everybody has to work, and the work is totally uncertain. You know, married, I don't know, then next week you get a job, you know, in Chicago. Then what do we do? So, no children. These things are cumulatively producing a loneliness and an unrootedness that is part of the empathy with the Gazans. Is they feel, I mean, obviously bombs are not falling on them, and I don't mean to say that their suffering is comparable. It isn't. But there's a basis for identification. We're being destroyed. We're being destroyed. And what did we do? I worked hard. I studied hard. I got good grades. I did my homework. You know, my parents said, this is good. You're good. And now I'm stuck here. I can't even take care of my parents. You know, what am I? They're very bitter. There's a very bitter, and that feeds the anger. Mm. Let me tell you about an event. I'm sure you heard about it, but it's not getting the attention here, and that's a sign of fear. A young man from a good family with a good Ivy League education walked not very far from here, walked up behind a CEO
United
and shot him to death. Crystal clear why. Because he's the head of a health insurance company. He was. And this kid has suffered, young man, I would guess, mid-20s, something like that, from an upper-class family in Baltimore, Maryland, a graduate, I believe, the University of Pennsylvania, Ivy League school. And so he writes on the shell of the bullet, the cartridge, deny, delay, defund, because that's what the insurance is.
Right.
When they don't cover your broken knee or your illness, which is how the guy became a millionaire.
I don't know if you have read the University of Chicago polling that they did. It was about 1,100 respondents, but quite diverse, representing different
over the
parts.
whole country.
Over the whole country, asking for this particular event, and 66 to 70% of them said that our healthcare and the insurance sector is looting, and they didn't use the word looting, but profit and denying benefit coverage. That was 66 to 70%.
Yes. I've been reading other polls, but they get the same number. About 2/3 of the people expressed sympathy with what he did and why he did it. You get people who say, well, you're murderers and you shouldn't kill people, all that. But it is that. It's a pro forma. I'm not saying it isn't genuine. It's just they know that the big issue here, the issue of importance, is not the particular of what was done, but what the point of it is. And I can see it in young people, my students. I mean, if there were a call tomorrow for a demonstration here in downtown New York, just to show support for that young man, you'd need 1,000 cops to contain that movement. Wow. In the I live in Manhattan. I live in a tall building on the 9th floor. So I have to go in the elevator, to get to my apartment. So I'm sitting in the elevator. I'm listening to the conversations. There's 6 or 7 people in the elevator. And I've been listening. Nobody is against what happened. Right. All of these people are commenting to one another in sympathy because they've all had the experience. Anyway, that's frightening. Because I went to Yale and all that, I get documents from the Yale Center for whatever it's called, entrepreneurship. One of these grotesque things that Ivy League universities and others do. It's just a way of sucking money. You bring the executive, you put him in a nice hotel, you get a few professors to pretend that they care what he says. He says something, you send him home, and a check comes to help the university. So I read, they're having meetings at Yale of executives who are anxiously talking about beefing up their security. They know it's not limited to that man. They know it's not limited to that industry. What are they picking up on? Rage, hostility. And let me make it personal. I'm a critic of capitalism. You know, I'm not interested in the individual acts of this or that capitalism. I'm a critic. I can't handle the invitations. I can't. They're everywhere. Churches, universities, labor unions, the media, I mean, all the time. You know, and I'm just one person in the void talking, but the critique of the capitalism, people want to hear it.